radio and the Backseat Admiral. So, like always, if you are in the chat, if you could just post if you can hear me on the mic. It looks like it should be working, but I just want to double check before I just keep talking to myself. Today is January 17th, 2022, and we'll be going over Season 3, Episode 5. I hope everyone is having a great day. Today we are significantly warmer than we were last week here, which is pretty nice. It's a whole 26 degrees instead of 5 degrees. So if someone's in chat, just let me know if my mic's working. If not, I'll just keep going. Let's see. Today we're going to be talking about two fleets. One of the fleets is submitted to us from Patreon, Mick Sweetie. Thank you very much, James. I'm glad you guys can hear me, and welcome to the stream. And then sorry, what was I saying? Mick Sweaty had a Agate Fleet with the Starhawk that I flew, and then Ken made a Constantine fleet that he flew against me. So we're gonna go over that. So let's flip on over to that. Okay. So first we'll go over the Agate Fleet. It is a Starhawk Class 1 battleship, or Mark 1 battleship. I'll move the mic a little closer to me. Let's see if that's any better. So it has Krista Agate on it, Walix Bliss. It has 2 officer slots, so it also has Ramus and Tilly's gunnery teams, flak guns, leading shots, and for the turbo laser slot, it has the TBY 827 heavy turbo lasers, and then the Amity title. And all of this kind of works really well together to make this like a vicious flak salvo ship. So with this, you can take with Krista Agate an additional salvo. So now you have 2 salvos, which is pretty good because then you can get pretty much guaranteed 2 uses out of it before you have to start discarding them. And then with Amity, you get a dice that you can use to cancel a dice at long range or re-roll at closer ranges if you're getting hit by black dice. So that's pretty useful. And because you have so many tokens, like you have, like every token except a scatter, accuracies are harder to pick what you use against it. I like Walix Blissus is like one of the best cards to put on one of these ships because Agate's ability of you can just discard a defense token to use it anyway is great with him because I'll just get it back the next time I activate it. And that's fun for the player that's playing the ship, not fun for those that are playing against it. And then Ramus and Tilly's works well too because this fleet doesn't have any squadrons you need to be commanding. Basically, that knocks down one. Now you're down to 3/4 of the commands that you want to do, and he gives you a token. So if you need to adjust speed, you can use your nav dial. You already get a nav token, so then you can move on to something else. And then with the gunnery teams and wanting to shoot twice, you can do a concentrate fire, get the token, and then you can trigger gunnery teams turns later with the token. So you can like plan ahead and do different attacks then with that. Also, if you look at what the salvo is, 2 red dice and a black dice is pretty mean, especially when you look at the fact that flak guns allows you to throw that black at medium range. So most of the time you're like, I'm a 3 dice salvo at medium range or less, and I have DBY, so that black is guaranteed to be a double hit, unless, I just want to move it up to 3 or make it annoying with a red crit if I roll that double on the black. The only thing I could maybe change with this is leading shots. As much as that reroll is really good for that big front arc, point defense ion cannons are very, very useful for ships like this against squadrons, with it being squadronless, because you could just, okay, whatever, reroll, and if it rolls into a blank or an accuracy, then it's just discarded on every single attack, and that's kind of powerful. So that's the change I would consider on that. Then we jump into the 2 support ships, which are both MC-30 torpedo frigates, pretty much configured exactly the same, except for the title. So I'll just be talking about them both at the same time. So they have Intel Officer, which is a really good way to come in to start big hits against ships with like really mean side arcs. That's 3 blacks and 2 blues. Like Intel Officer, Bracer, Redirect, it's gone. And then the Starhawk can follow up, and it's pretty brutal. Ordnance experts to reroll those black dice. Advanced projectors, very strong on MC-30s. They are already one of the most shielded ships, especially for being a small base. And it has 2 redirects, which is actually pretty rare for most ships to have duplicate of anything, let alone redirects. So with that, you can just spread shields all around. Foresight and Admo are both great titles that if you're bringing them. I think Foresight, since 1.5, is stronger than Admo because Admo has to be a ready defense token now. But they're still good and still great on this. The thing that I would change about this ship, though, is the assault concussion missiles being paired with XI-7 turbo lasers. I would switch one of those 2 cards out to something else because they kind of are going against what they actually want to do. And I'll explain why. So if you look at XI-7 turbo lasers, it nerfs the ability to use redirects to divert to the side shields. And what assault concussion missiles do is it does damage to the side shields. So if you didn't have XI-7s and you allowed them to redirect and deplete those side shields, then assault concussion missiles is awesome because that gets damage then in through the hull on the sides, or allows them not to redirect to further places. But with a small ship that's throwing black dice with Intel Officer, you're probably not going to have them redirecting that much because you're going to come in, hit them hard once, and then get out of there. And with Intel Officer, if they have a redirect, it's gone. So they almost want to leave their shields on the side and just bore right through the middle of the hull zone that you're attacking with XI-7s. And assault concussions kind of go against that. I think that having APT would be more useful because you're drilling through the hull, you're doing extra hull damage, and then if you get like a lucky projector misalignment, then their shields are gone anyway. While this, you're not letting them move it to the shield, so that extra damage on the sides not going to be as effective. If I were to switch out the ordnance card, I would switch it to APT or external racks. And if I were to switch out the XI-7s, which I actually think XI-7s are pretty good here, I would switch it out to be, I believe it's H9. Let me just double check to make sure. H9 is the one that allows you to take basically a blue hit or crit and turn it into an accuracy, which is really, really good on torpedo ships. Turbo lasers, here it is. It's near the bottom. Yeah, H9 turbo lasers. It allows you while attacking to change one dice with a hit or crit face to an accuracy. You have blue dice, so that's if you don't get the accuracy you need, you automatically get the accuracy. And it's really good for hunting down like smaller ships, especially like flotillas. They're just flotilla killers because the black dice theoretically should be 3-4 damage. And then which H9's one of your 2 blue dice automatically turns into block your scatter with it, and then they're dead. So with both those cards, I don't think the combo works well. It still is fine, but I think that there's better options for it that would be more effective. Maybe points run into an issue. Let me double check points. I always forget how much H9 costs. H9 costs 8 points, so you need to gain 2. So let's say we leave XI-7s there, and then we get 2 points back by switching from assault concussion missiles down to APT. That's probably what I would choose there. But for the most part, this is a very lean, mean fleet. It doesn't have fighters that you can like slowly pick apart. The 2 ships that aren't the Starhawk are actually pretty tanky, pretty hard to kill, and they're under 100 points. So more than likely, if you kill one, you should have traded, and they're really good trade up value ships. So they're very good at killing ships that are worth more than them and possibly surviving or trading with. And the Starhawk, you don't really want to attack it because of all the really, really mean salvo. So then you go after these things and they're like zooming around at speed 4. So it's either do I actually full on attack into the Starhawk, or do I try to kill the little ships that are going to be, you know, flying around and flying away. So that's a pretty good pairing there. Just point fortress, and then you have two small fast ships. So yep, really like that fleet. And just a couple changes. Now let's move on to Ken's fleet here. Ken made a Constantine fleet, and Constantine's one of those fleets that, or commanders that I wish I liked. I wish he was good. I understand why he's not good, because it would make the playing experience really, really painful, but it makes trying to use him very, very difficult. I don't play Magic, so I believe blue decks are referred to as like control decks, and he falls into that realm of control. And most people have a very negative player experience with control decks. I like control type decks and being able to control what your opponent does, but it does take away a lot of the player choice for your opponent, and that takes a lot of the fun out of it. So he allows you to adjust your opponent's speed, and sometimes it's useful and sometimes it's not. And he usually involves taking extra upgrades so that he is more beneficial. So while he's cheap-ish as a commander, you have to spend so many extra points to do things that allow him to be semi-useful, but still not very good. So let's take it away first. So first, there's an Interdictor Suppressor Refit with Admiral Constantine. So we'll read what he has been changed to since 1.5, because they completely revised him. As the start of each status phase, so that's at the end of the turn, you may choose any number of enemy ships at distance 1 to 5, at least 2 friendly non-flotilla ships, one of which must be of medium or large size class. For each ship in that range, you may discard a nav token from it, or increase or decrease its speed by 1 to a minimum of a speed 1. So you can't drop people to speed 0, but you can increase or decrease their speed to try to throw them off. And you have to be near 2 ships, and the ships can't be flotillas, and one of them has to be at least a medium or a large ship. So that's like a lot of restrictions, especially for the Empire, when most of the Imperial large ships are like 150 points. So you start off with 150 points, and then this commander costs 23 points. So you're looking at like, you're already at 170 points, and now you need more ships that aren't flotillas to do things with. And then you probably need other upgrades on top of that to try to play the game a little bit more. And a lot of times that's the Pylon Q7 tractor beams. And they cost 6 points. So if you have 3 ships, that's 18 points if you put that on each of them. So like the cost of him just adds up. It's the Sato trap for the Imperials, honestly. Like, you have to have this, but then you also need this, but then you need this to do this, and then what you do is like this big, and it's like a lot of points that aren't really used for it. So for his officer on this, he can put Captain Nita, and that allows him to change out one of those contains for a evade, which is fine. It helps keep the ship alive at range, because a lot of times you're not really using the contains, because you're just trying to regenerate shields. He has Nav Team as that slot. I'm not a fan of Nav Team, mainly because a lot of times, Ken and I actually talk about this all the time. When I do a Nav, I do it to mainly change speed. When Ken does a Nav, he mainly does it to gain extra clicks. So this type of card works for Ken, doesn't work for me. I wouldn't put it on. It's 4 points that I would just probably never use, because for the most part, this movement chart isn't bad. It's 1 click in each joint for a ship that doesn't go really fast. So I'm pretty comfortable getting it where I need to with that. Then we come across the Pylon Q7 tractor beams, which is the card that I said that you probably need if you're playing Constantine to make it so that he's worthwhile. And it is when you activate, you may exhaust this card to choose one enemy ship of your size, class, or smaller at distance 1 to 5. That ship must spend a nav token or reduce its speed by 1 to a minimum of 1. So if you wanted to try to slow your enemy ships down, what you do is you use the pylons to slow down when you activate, and then you use at the end of the turn Constantine to slow them down again. So then when you activate again, you can slow them down. So theoretically, if you move after, so if your opponent moves, you move your ship and your first player, you could drop them theoretically from speed 4 down to speed 1, which is okay if that's what you want to do. Then we look at the Grav shift reroute. And it is before deploying fleets, place one Grav shift token anywhere in the play area. After deploying fleets, you may move each obstacle at distance 1 to 3 of that token within distance 2 of the obstacle's current location. Obstacles cannot overlap tokens, obstacles, or other ships. And this is one of the fun, unique cards that come with the Interdictor. For the most part, you have 3 unique upgrades for the Interdictor, and then the 1 generic. So the unique one is this Grav shift reroute that you can move obstacles. Then you have here's a speed 0 bubble that I'm going to put in your deployment. And then you also have the G8 experimental projectors, which I'm going to read about next. And then you have targeting scramblers. The G8 allows you, we totally messed this up, by the way, in the game. So apologies for that. There was a lot of slowdown mechanics that we haven't used probably ever. So we messed it up. We've gone back, and I'll show you when I go through the different turns that I don't think it really would have mattered. But we did mess it up. In later games down the road, you'll see us using it again, and we use it properly that time. So we do learn from our mistakes. So the G8 says, before an enemy ship at distance 1 to 5 resolves the determined course step, you may exhaust this card to temporarily reduce its speed by 1 to a minimum of speed 0 until the end of the maneuver. And where we messed up was that if you temporarily reduce my speed, so it's all a timing issue. So technically, they have to use this card against you as you're picking up the movement tool. So then you know what your speed is. There's no like, I do my whole planning phase and go to lock in. You're like, ha ha ha. You can reconsider that at speed 1 or 0 now. That's not how it works. It's not how it's intended to work. So you need to immediately tell them, I'm using this as they're picking up the tool to slow you, reduce your speed by 1. So then you know. But what that does is it doesn't change your dial. It's just treating whatever your dial's currently set at as 1 less. So in the game, I think I was treating it more like a pylon, that my speed got reduced and then I'm just increasing it back up by spending a token. That's not how it works. If I was speed 2 and Ken were to use the G8, I would only be having the option to go speed 1. There's no way for me to go back up to speed 2, which is what I did in one of the instances. But I'll show you where I was and where I moved to and how it probably wouldn't have changed things that much. But that's how it is actually intended to be used. The other options on here would be targeting scramblers. I just don't like bringing an interdictor without targeting scramblers. Targeting scramblers can be used on your own ship, on friendly ships, and being able to reroll 4 dice at close range is huge. And it really helps keep your ships alive. And with like the Interdictor title, then you can do it like twice in 1 round. So I usually shy away from bringing any 2 of the unique Grav shift upgrades on the same Interdictor. I like playing double Interdictor lists. So I would put like 1 unique card in a targeting scrambler and then another unique card in a targeting scrambler. Rarely would I ever build 2 unique cards into it. But this is where Constantine becomes the trap, because where else would you use G8? You probably wouldn't. But because it's Constantine, you're spending it on that instead of targeting scramblers, which I think you should bring targeting scramblers even if you're playing Constantine, but it's like a hard like choice because like you want to control speed, and this is a decent control speed card if you're able to reduce them down to 1 because then they just don't move. But it's like a lot of point investment for in replacing things that may be better. So then we have the M1 Ion Cannon. Choose and exhaust one of your defender's upgrade cards. This card, I wish it was better. And against the Clone Wars factions, it actually is halfway decent if you can get it to trigger right. But for the most part, like you think about it, like I could disable any of the opponent's cards. And that's not actually the case. You can exhaust any card, but cards only don't work if they have an exhaust cost / refresh cost. So if you were to hit this card against, let's say, this ship, and you're like, I don't want them to use nav team, exhaust your nav team. Well, guess what? That player can still use nav team because nav team does not cost anything to exhaust. But if you were to use it against, say, any of these cards like the Pylon or the G8 or the Interdictor, yes, that would spend that. So, like, if you think about it, like, if you go against someone that's using a spat and you hit them with this, well, guess what? You can exhaust that spat before they have the chance to use the ship to place it out, which is pretty good. And then they still have to pay the refresh cost to bring it back. So there's that. Okay, so let's move on to the next ship. I talked a lot, but, you know, Constantine and all of his maneuver stuff, that's a lot. So this is a Simoon. It has Director Krennic. So Director Krennic triggers off Concentrate Fire, so we'll just make a mental note of that. Then you have Intensify Firepower, which I really like on Simoons because that's just auto hits. But again, triggers off a Concentrate Fire token, so that's now 2 instances of Concentrate Fire. Then you have Gunnery Team. And honestly, if you have a Simoon, you want Gunnery Team. You want those long-range red shots as much as possible. But that's also a Concentrate Fire. So he works well with Krennic, but you still need Concentrate Fires for Intensify Firepower. Then you have the Pylon because you're Krennic and you kind of have to bring it along. And then you have Link Turbo Laser Towers and XI7s. And they're both fine upgrades. My standard like go-to for Simoons, though, is Spinal Armament. So then you have 6 dice starting out the front, and then XI7. So if any of my damage lands, you can't redirect it. But being able to reroll on both attacks with Gunnery Teams with Link Turbo Laser Towers is perfectly fine. But you already have reroll with Director Krennic, and if you should be doing Gunnery Teams every turn if possible, so you don't necessarily need it because you can reroll any of your red dice anyway. So that's just like an extra layer of reroll. Ship's fine. Then let's move on to this Gazanti. You have a Gazanti, it has Comms Net, I like that, and then because again, you're Constantine, you're going to be using Admiral Titus, and you kind of want to use him because of changing your speed. So this is like a card that you bring because you're playing an Interdictor list, because you're playing Constantine. So he's just like tacked on, like, when else am I going to use him? This is his time. This is his time to shine. And he's like, okay. Next ship. This is the ship I think I would change the most in this. Darth Vader and Parts Resupply. Parts Resupply doesn't work for this fleet at all. And the reason why it doesn't work for this fleet is back to the Simoon. What does the Simoon want? It wants Concentrate Fire tokens. This is passing out engineering tokens. What you need is you need the other one or a Comms Net to just feed it Concentrate Fire tokens so it can keep Intensify Firepower alive. With that being said, now let's look at Darth Vader. Why do we have Darth Vader? And Darth Vader is here because you have a lot of officers that are in this fleet that aren't needed, and they're like one-time use, and then they're gone. But the Darth Vader doesn't really help doing any of these rerolls. So let's go back through the fleet. So let's say if you have Intensify Firepower on and you have a Gazanti shooting, it's an automatic hit. Neither Gazanti needs rerolls. And even if you were to discard Admiral Titus to reroll a blue die, it still doesn't really help that much because you could just set it with Intensify. You have Director Krennic and you have Link Turbo Laser Tower, so you probably don't need you wouldn't want to discard Director Krennic to do a reroll of all your dice. So that's not really useful. Captain Nita is easily tossed out the airlock because he doesn't do anything after the start of the first round. But you have blue dice, so it's either accuracies, hits, or crits. The red dice is just free bonus. That's why a lot of times I bring SW7s for this fleet. It's just you roll the dice, you don't even look at it. It's 3 damage. Cool. So Darth Vader just doesn't really fit in with the rest of this fleet because even though there's tons of discardable officers, none of them discarding really help you because you either already had built-in rerolls or you don't need rerolls. Now let's get to the fighter screen. I actually really like this fighter screen. It's mean. It's Soontir, Sienna, and Black Squadron. And all of them have counter. And if they move into you, you're probably engaged by Black Squadron and Soontir and Sienna, who Sienna's a real pain to try to kill. But first you have to get through Black Squadron, and every time you attack Black Squadron, you're getting countered and then taking a damage from Soontir. It's mean for just being 3 squadrons and pretty cheap. It's a pretty good, I'm going to survive a couple rounds of fighter attacks while my ships do their thing. So last thing on this, and we see this directly impact the game that we played, is that Constantine wants 2 ships that are non-flotillas to be in range to get his effect. Ken brought along with him 2 ships and then 2 flotillas. So he had to have both of his main ships in range to get Constantine's effect, and as soon as one of them dies, then he no longer gets Constantine's effect. And then on top of that, with the flotillas, if the 2 bigger ships die, his fighters and his flotillas immediately get wiped out because of tabling rules. So there's not very much that holds onto the table with this, and both those ships need to be in combat range during the entire game to gain Constantine's effect. And I'm still not sold Constantine's effect is very good, but that just, like, it's just like Constantine's such a hard build. It's like I said, it's like the Sato build. There's like just so many layers that you have to like check to get him to function, and it's just hard to do. Okay, so I'm going to go to comments, see if anyone has anything there. So if you have a comment or thought on Constantine, Starhawks, Interdictor, upgrades, things like that, go ahead and ask them, and then I'll break down how the game actually got played out. And I'll see what has been said in comments so far. Okay. Starhawk is a brutal piece of kit, honestly. I've only seen it taken down maybe twice, and all the times I've seen it played barely, I might add. I know, it is such a point fortress. Like, I'm not trying to diss on Wave 8. I'm not a big fan of Wave 8. People know that. But you have the Rebels, which were always about fast movement, more MSU, fighter builds, and like, oh, I can hold off your fighters while my ships can do stuff, or my bombers can move into range. And they weren't really able to point fortress, except for with like an MC-80, which was slow, and you see it in Akbar builds. But then the Starhawk came out, and it is the absolute most point fortressy ship there is. It's way less points than the SSD, so you can still have other parts of your fleet to it. And it just point fortresses so well. Like, it is really hard to kill, especially with Agate. Like, Agate clearly was made for it, but like, why would you run it without Agate? Here's a free defense token to a ship that already has all the defense tokens, with titles that give you defense tokens, with salvo that you can upgrade to be better salvo. So while you're shooting me, I'm shooting you, and then I shoot you. It's brutal. And I've only seen it taken down a couple times as well. And every time I've seen it taken down, it didn't have Agate on it. So I'm like, I don't know if I'd ever bring Agate or Starhawk fleet without Agate. They're just paired so well. Hello, Nidapir PL. Hey, Scala, how are you doing? Agree, targeting Scramblers. I just wish Interdictors were like 10 points less. They really struggle to fit in a 400 point list, but something like 600 points is an easy add. I would agree. So especially when you like really look at like what the Interdictor does for firepower, and then how many extra points you need to tack onto the Interdictor with like the upgrade cards, because all the upgrade cards are like 5 to 10 points for it. And then you look at like the Onager testbed and it's like 2 points more. Like, really? How is this? How do these points work out? Like, it doesn't make sense. I think that's one of the hardest parts with medium-based ships is they're not largest. And if you look at like the scaling for costing, so you have like small base ships that are anywhere between, we'll just call it 40 points, up to about 65-ish points. Those are small bases. And then you have large bases which are like 90 points to like 120 points. And then you usually put upgrades on them. So medium-based ships have this really small area to live in, which is like 70 to 80 points plus upgrades. And when you look at it, like you could get 2 small ships in for the price of a large ship. Or you could just get a large ship. And medium ships are like, I'm going to cost the same amount of a large ship, have nowhere near amount of firepower, nowhere near amount the movability, and nowhere near the survivability, so I'm just going to move on. And then the Interdictor on top of that is like, I'm already a large ship price, and I have the firepower of a small ship. And it's like, really like, oh, I just don't want it. Yeah, okay, so yeah, we agree. But most of those, that's what also I struggle with. Like, almost all the medium ships I like. I'm glad that in the Clone Wars era, you see more of a place for them. Like, I can say, like, I'll bring an Acclimator. Acclimators I really like for their cost. But again, like, if I'm really wanting to push fighters, that Ven 2, not being that many more points, being able to push 5 squadrons and have more health is way better. Munificents are good. But, like, I could bring a Munificent or I could bring a Recusant. And Recusants are really good, especially if you just slap a Patriot's Fist on it. Like, that greatly increases the thing, and it goes speed 3 and super maneuverable compared to Munificent. At least Munificents are super maneuverable. And then you have, like, what? Specialty ships for the Empire. You have Interdictor, specialty ship. You're bringing it because you want to be able to use the special things, but you understand that it's going to be like 150 points and be like 3 blue dice. That's your attack. And then you have a Quasar, which you get up to like, 90-ish points, but that's like dedicated squadron. And then you have a Victory, which is just no fault of its own, but it was the first ship released, so it has no space to live anymore because everything has, like I said, like the points for smalls have gone. And then the larges, like, it doesn't have a place to live, and, like, its maneuverability is awful and too expensive for what it is. So that's my take on mediums. I like mediums, but it's just really frustrating. And then you have the Ugly Potato. And the Ugly Potato is actually a really good ship for the Rebels if they didn't have any of their larges. So mediums have a very, very hard spot to live in the game. I could probably do a whole video on just medium-based ships, because I like them. We should rank them. I'll think about that. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into it. We're going to talk about objectives. Ken, I believe, was first player, and he chose me to go second, which, if I was bringing an Interdictor list, or I chose to go second. Yes, I think I had bid, and I chose to go second. I have this written down. Give me 1 second. Sometimes I just forget because all the games. Because if you're an Interdictor, you want to go second, and if you're facing an Interdictor list, you don't want them to go second because it's just going to be bad. This fleet is here. No. Ken had the bid, and Ken chose to be first. So he chose this fate. So my objectives are surprise attack, because the Starhawk says, I would really like you to sit here and let my MC-30s kill you first. And then contested outposts, and the Starhawk is like, hey, I would really like to sit right here and not move. I'm a 4. You're going to need to get a lot of ships in range to take this contested. And then Solar Corona is like, oh, so I'd like to see where you are, and then set up on the opposite side, and then sweep in with all my fast ships while my Starhawk cuts off your escape route. And that's really it for those objectives. That's why I pretty much always have them chosen. Ken chose Solar Corona, and as you're going to see, we set up like this. So he set up his fleet in the middle here, some fighters, his Gazantes, Simoon, and his Interdictor. This is after he moved the obstacles with his Interdictor ability. And honestly, like, part of me thinks that surprise attack or contested outpost could be more useful when, like, those are liabilities when you face Interdictor lists. Because let's say if I were to put the outpost, it would probably be somewhere right around here is where I could put it. Well, you could move it too closer to you, and now it's technically on your side of the board, and that's huge. Or I put the surprise attack ship here. Well, then you get to move that too, and then you can control where your flagship is. So if I were to choose, I probably would have picked contested, because I know I would have to completely kill this fleet to win against it just by the point breakdown of where the ships are. And contested would allow me to then control where the other opponent placed. So I have both of the MC-30s here with the Starhawk kind of just slowly pointed in. And that's how we move. Boom, right here. Speed 4 with tokens, so I at least can survive one round of all the shenanigans that Constantine has. Speed 2 with token as well. So being now outside range, so this is where we make the mistake, is on this turn. And so if we mark, though, I'm going to mark with my mouse where the ship is. I move speed 2. Technically, Ken drops me down. This is where we made the mistake with G8, and I would only move speed 1. So let's look where speed 1 would be. Speed 1 is about the length of this MC-30. So we'll say it's going to be right about there. So my corner would be roughly on where the mouse is. And then we jump to the next picture. It would still be close range for dice draw. So with that being said, if we're going to still be close range, if I move speed 2 or speed 1 just by where it is, it really wouldn't have mattered. And that's where Constantine becomes like, is he even useful then? Because you can't use him until they get into range. So then, if you're already in range, you're then controlling range. And a lot of times you're not going to be able to slow someone down fast enough to keep them at long range, or you're trying to slow them down to keep them in close range of you. So sometimes that doesn't work. Like, it works okay-ish if you're facing like a swarm of MSU and you want to like lock them down and keep them where you're at. Hold on. It looks like Google's just yelling at me. So I'm going to give it a 1 second to catch back up. All my bits and everything look like they're going fine. Sometimes I don't understand YouTube. So hopefully you guys are still getting the image fine. And then I'll go back in. So like Constantine, like, he struggles, like, do I keep ships out of my range? But he doesn't work until you get into range. And then if you're in range, does he hold you in range? Because sometimes you don't really want to hold an MC-30 in range of you, because they're going to outshoot you probably at close range. So like this little death trap right here of, I moved all my ships from out of his range into his range, and then he slowed me down. I'm like, okay, cool, I want to be in black range. like, it doesn't really work. And if you look at where all these ships are, targeting scramblers would have possibly saved his ship or one of his ships over the course of the turns, because this is all black range, all black dice shooting into his ships. Even the Starhawk is like the firepower punches at black range out the front and out the side. Targeting scramblers would have been able to at least made me reroll all those doubles and things like that. It would have been painful. But like, this is why Constantine's doesn't work. And then we go to the next one. This is just the end. I tried to remember to take one for Backseat, like at the very end of the game, so then we can see where everything landed. Ken's fighters came over to try to attack the MC-30, and then table rules kick in. So it was a fast game. We were out of range, in range, dead. And it all went very, very fast. I had some really good rolls with the MC-30s, which were beautiful. I expected to lose at least one of the MC-30s, but if the MC-30 helped kill the Interdictor or it helped kill the Star Destroyer, it really trades up in points. So like, it's less than 100 points for over 100 points. Like we were talking about, like most Star Destroyers end up being like 150, and then the Interdictor here with the Admiral's like 150, because everything is so expensive. And then you have to bring all that extra garbage for Constantine, who already doesn't work as a commander, to try to work as a commander. Man, Constantine. I wish he was good, but I understand why he is not, because if you just controlled everything your opponent does, it would be a super unfun game. And I keep telling myself that, and it's the same thing why, like, survive builds don't work either, and I'm totally fine with that, because shooting endlessly at a ship and it having enough engineering points to just completely repair itself all the time would suck. Point fortresses suck. That's why it's a lot of times not fun to go against a Starhawk, because it takes so much firepower to kill it. And like interdictors that are healing and getting healed, like you can heal like 10 engineering for, so like what, 8 you could do with an interdictor, so that's like 4 shields. Then you could pass 2 shields to it with another interdictor, so you can add 5 shields. But for the most part, like a CR-90 can put out at least 5 points of damage, and it's a small ship, so like against a big ship you'll eventually wear it down quickly. So like surviving tanky controlled decks don't work in Armada. Alpha Strike decks work. So like, I'm glad that it's focused on the offense instead of the defense aspects of the game. That's all I'm trying to say. So let's look at the final score. If you look, final score here, 99 points, because he managed to kill the MC-30, which traded up, and then because tabling rules, 400 points for me, which is a 10-1 because of 301. And I have to say, you know, after looking back at it, it made me kind of laugh. Like, your goal should usually be to table your opponent, and like this Starhawk fleet is built that if you only kill one of the MC-30s, more than likely you get a 10-1 if you table them, because it's going to be less than 100 points, and the cutoff to get the 10-1 is 300 points. Like, that is well thought out. I don't know if Mick Sweaty intentionally did that. I'm sure he will say, like, in our Discord, because he's on that. He's one of our Patreon members. But like, designing it to be at those cutoff points, that's like one of the things I don't actually do when I design fleets. I kind of think about it, but I don't design like, if I lose this, I still get this many points. If I lose this, I still get this many points. But this works out really well. 99 points, and I don't remember what the other one is. It's slightly cheaper, but if you only lose one of the MC-30s and you table them, it's pretty much a guaranteed 10-1, which is well thought out. So major props there. Let's see if there's anything else I really wanted to talk about. Like the damage, everything goes from kind of wounded to dead and then over. And then like, if you look at the Imperial side, we're fine, and then it's like a little bit of hull damage, and then everything dead. Like, it was like a blaster fest of everything dying and getting shot up in like one turn. Kind of crazy. So I think that's all on that match that I have to say, it was just a slugfest. We both like that's what's fun about Simoons. It's like here's a handful of dice, and then here's a Starhawk, handful of dice, and we just rolled handfuls of dice at each other, and it was fast, so that's always fun. I'm gonna go into the comments if you guys have any questions or any thoughts or anything like that. Go ahead and throw them down there, and I'll try to answer them. Let's see what's going on. Skull. Yeah, I feel like mediums need something special that make them worth it. Maybe like cheaper titles or something. That is very true, and that's what really, really hurts the victory. Is the victory's already overexpensive, and then they're like, you know what, titles should cost like 10, 12 points. I think like the most expensive title in the entire game is a Dominator for the victory. Like, it's stupid expensive. Like, they have like the most expensive titles for the whole game. Let's find out. Give me a second, let me pull this up and I'll scroll down. Okay, so the most expensive title in the game alphabetically is Dominator. It's 12 points. It's for a victory. 12 points. That's way too much. The next most expensive is the Concorde for the Starhawk. 12 points. Reasonable. It's a big ship. Then you have Unity. 10 points. Again, big ship. You have Sunder, large. And then Demolisher at 10 points. Like, those are the most expensive cards. And then you have Invisible Hand. And then the next is at 8 points, Warlord, which is a victory. So the victories titles are all up there in like the most expensive titles in the game for a ship that's already kind of too expensive. Like, it just makes it not worthwhile. If those were like half the cost, you might see them a little bit, because then you could be like, oh, 6 points for that title might make it worth it. But 12 points, 100%, that's not worthwhile. So you were very right with that. If they had interesting titles, it would make it way better. Mike says, I like the medium bases if they have evade. The evade against large base ships help them survive. I would agree. Evade does help that. I know they withhold the evades for smaller ships. Like, if you look at like the design philosophy, I see them doing it for like smaller, sleeker ships or faster ships. But sadly, most of the medium base ships are big ships, like a Victory, like a Acclamator, an Interdictor. Interdictors, none of those three ships should have evades. And then you have like the Quasar, which they only gave 2 defense tokens because you really want to just keep it out of combat. A Quasar would be amazing with an evade, because then you could just skirt the edge and like just cancel dice out. Like, it would be really good with an evade. And if you could give it to him, like if you had even a contain, like putting Nita on a Quasar as the officer would be like really worthwhile. Switch out that contain for an evade. I would do that almost every single time. But they don't. The Rebel one already has a built-in evade, and it's pretty good. Like, it's decent. So, I'd agree. And then... yeah, Mariano is talking about how it's not about the firepower, it's about the experimental retrofits and the objective. Yes, I agree. That's why you bring in interdictors. But I still think interdictors cost too much, and their experimental cost. So you're paying a premium for the chassis to bring the experimental retrofit, and then you're paying a premium for the experimental retrofit. Like, you're getting double tax, and then on top of that, you're paying the Imperial tax, so you're getting taxed 3 times for an interdictor. And it just brings the cost up too much. It does control the game in objectives very, very well, but then you're very limited on what else you can bring. Like, as soon as you start cross over that 400 point mark, which I think is what Skull pointed out, like at 600, 800 points, interdictors are amazing, because then you can have other ships working next to them, which you may be seeing in the future. James, do you use your end of turn recap form during tournaments? You'll have to clarify what you mean by that. I don't necessarily know how to answer that. So if you, James, if you don't mind just clarifying a little bit more of what you mean by your question, then I'll try to answer it. Yeah, contested outpost. I honestly, so I've gotten Ken to this point. I think that he sometimes outthinks himself. Like we've played a lot of contested outpost, and I've honestly, a contested outpost, so Solar Corona are probably the two objectives that I've played the absolute most because they're pretty much always in my fleets, and so I'm really good at contested outpost, and when done right, it's automatically 120 points for the defending player. It's very hard to push someone off. So unless you come in knowing that you can push someone off or table them, picking contested outpost is a real gamble, especially against a Starhawk. Like a Starhawk just tanks on top of it. So I bet that's why he didn't pick it, and went with Solar Corona instead. And then targeting Scramblers, 100%. Yeah, I like targeting Scramblers. Honestly, like before they put the rule in that you only could have one of each upgrade, could you imagine like putting a suppressor with two targeting Scramblers because it has the two slots theoretically, and then also like Interdictor, it's like reroll, 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 reroll. That would be so much fun. No. Okay. Skull, general opinion, do you think two MC30s for less than 200 points is balanced in a 400 point game? No, absolutely not. MC30s are way undercosted for what they do. And I get they only have 4 hull, but they're so defensive. By far, I want to say MC30s are the absolute best ship in the Rebel fleet. But like I was saying before, that's a lot because of the Imperial tax, that if you look at all the Imperial ships, hull point for hull point, ability for ability, Imperials pay more points for their ships than Rebels do. So that's why, like, especially in like Rebellion and the Rim, it's difficult because like Rebel players have cheaper ships and most of their ships need one upgrade card on it. Done. CR90. All you need to put on it is what is it? Turbo laser one that you're like, oh, double hit, have fun. That's it. Like, what else do you put on it? Like, anything else you put on it is just too costly. And then you look at the Imperial side, and the closest thing you have to it is a Raider. It's not worth its points at all. And if you have a Raider, you need like, oh, I need an officer that gives me some defense. I need ordnance experts, and then I need either a blue or a black critical effect card. So it's already not worth its points compared to a CR90 because it doesn't have a redirect and it doesn't survive. Like you just sneeze in its general direction and it dies. And then in addition to it, you need 15 more points of upgrades. So then you have the MC30s, which have almost as much shields as a Star Destroyer, 4 hull, whatever. And it has a defensive retrofit slot. And if you upgrade it, it's less than 100 points. And it hits super, super hard. And it's speed 4. And it's super maneuverable. And it's command 2. So you're like, oh, navigate, and then I can change it up. It's like, instantly gets in, kills it, and runs. And then you look at, like, the closest thing to that is a Gladiator. And Gladiators are good if it has a 10-point title attached to it for demo, which has been nerfed like 3 times. But you don't see people running generic Gladiators. You don't see people running double Gladiators. There's no really other good title for it. So if you look at the cost of an MC30 versus the cost of generic Gladiators, which again, generic Gladiators need significant amount of cards to make useful, and those significant cards is basically you need Demolisher on it. Otherwise, it's completely useless. They are undercost. That's my opinion rant on MC30s. Okay, James, where you show how many shields are left on each ship hull remaining. So you're talking about in, let's say, Madness, our Madness tournament, or are you talking about if I were to go to an actual tournament? Because during an actual tournament, technically you're not allowed to write anything down. It's against the rules. Or use notes. So a lot of times on my sheet, I will write down what round it is, and then who I'm playing, and then ask them after the match if I can take a picture of their fleet. and then the rest of it's just me remembering in my head if they are fine with me taking a picture of where it is. That's how I do real tournament like overviews, but technically you're not allowed to take notes or pictures, so doing damage wouldn't really make sense. It would take too much time out of the game and distract both players. For our in-house tournaments that we do, like the March Madness that is coming up, yeah, we have time. Like, there's no time limit on it. So Ken and I will do whatever we normally do for those. Our filming process for Madness changes because we film from like one camera instead of like setting up each shot, so it's like a more straight through. So hopefully, James, that's answering what you're getting at, but I'm not sure. Jacob, suggestions for how to push someone off the outpost. The goal isn't to actually push them off the outpost. The goal is to table them before the end of the game. So let's say if you're looking across your opponent's fleet and you're like, I think I can kill them in 4 turns. That's my prediction. I could table this person in 4 turns. They have an Interdictor and a Moon, and then the Gazantes and the fighters I can ignore because when I kill those 2 ships, they're dead. They're going to have to put those 2 ships close to the outpost to control the outpost, so I know where they're going to be. With knowing where they're going to be, I can move across the table and I can kill them 4 turns, maybe 5 turns. So let's just say then they control the station for those turns. So we'll go on the worst case scenario. They control the station for 5 turns. I kill them beginning of turn 6 or something like that. That's 100 points. So I'm starting from a 100-point deficit. With me tabling them, that will give me 400 points, but I really only have 300 points due to the fact that I'm 100 points down from the objective. Do I think I can table them or have at least 100 points break even? If I was the Starhawk player facing Ken's fleet and he had Contested Outpost, I would pick Contested Outpost because I think my Starhawk can move forward to kill both his ships with my MC-30s coming around to help do additional damage before the end of 6 turns. So his objective points from Contested Outpost would be less than 100, which was me just trading him then an MC-30. It's a wash, it's a table, I still win. So that's kind of how you think about it when you're thinking about Contested Outpost. It's not about actually pushing him off the objective. It's about, I 100% know where he's going to deploy and where he's going to be moving, and he has to be moving slow because as soon as he moves away from the Contested Outpost, I can either take it or he's lost. So that's the calculations that you have to do when you get handed Contested Outpost to know if you want to take it or not. Can I do enough damage to him quickly enough that each turn goes by, those 20 points that he gains isn't going to cause me to lose the game? So I hope that helps. Yeah, Skull. It's already super survivable ship, and then you put the titles in, and it's like, I can discard to just get rid of a dice. Any dice. I get to choose. Or I get to use my redirects and my evades twice. What? That's so powerful. Marino, the problem with the Starhawk fleet is you in 100% for it or totally ignore it. Together with the MC-30, the ship that never dies, it's a tanky fleet. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about with like point fortressing and then like trading. Like if I could trade an MC-30 for a Star Destroyer, I'll do it every single day. Your Star Destroyer versus my Starhawk probably won't kill it unless, lucky crits or something like that. But for the most part, like I could just sit there on the other side of the table and there's nothing you can do about it. Especially if I have Contested Outposts, like I'll just sit on the outpost and, okay, yeah, come on over. If you take longer than 3 turns to get to me, there's no way you're going to have enough firepower to kill me, and I'm going to have 120 points in whatever I plink shot down of yours, so I'm going to win. So you're referring to an actual tournament. I haven't been to an actual tournament. The last tournament I've actually been to has been LVO, way back, and you can see my battle report on that. I took a bunch of pictures and notes, and I had the people that I play actually send me the fleets afterwards, and I just review of my thoughts on their fleet, my fleet, how they faced, and how it went turn by turn. You can just search our thing. I think we have it saved. And then Skull asks, speaking of tournaments, are you and Ken going to Adepticon debating whether to drive in and play? So for me, I'm 100% no. It lands on my weekend to work, and with me having a baby in the next couple of weeks, I just don't see myself wanting to leave and go to a place that's so crowded, even if they have like strict, oh, you have to be vaccinated and wear a mask type of thing. COVID's real, and I don't want to give it to a newborn. So I will just stay away from tournament scene for a good while. And that's before the fact that it's my weekend to work, and I'll just be coming off of probably paternity leave. So I won't have any time off to take, and my job, I won't have anyone to trade with. So there's no way for me to get there. Ken is still debating it, so that's something you'll have to follow up with Ken about. But for the time being, I'm staying away from the tournament scene. Even though I would like to, it's just not feasible with real life. In the end of the day, it's plastic spaceships, and real life's more important, even though I really love my plastic spaceships. So hopefully that answers your question. And then Jacob says thanks. I think that's due to Contested Outpost. So that you had a glimpse there of my thought process on a lot of objectives. Is kind of like that. I still need time to make like a good solid video of how I choose objective, because every single objective I have ranked in my head and how I play it in different fleets and different things to consider. I have like a handful of things that I think about when I'm selecting objectives for my fleet, and then when I get handed a set of objectives, it's usually pretty quick, unless I never sometimes I get handed like 3 objectives I've never played before and aren't common. I'm like, I have to read every single word on this because I haven't played this in a long time. Yeah, so let's see. So how to win against lists that are tanky? You either out tank them or you outplay them. And it's hard. Super tanky lists are hard to beat. But there are ways to do it. And let's say if I went against the Starhawk list. Again, it depends on what type of list it has. If I had the bid, I would probably choose to make the engagement. Anytime that you're first player, you have to choose to engage, because if all 6 turns went down and no one were to have traded any points, the second player automatically default wins. On top of that, most of the second player objectives are easier for the second player to score victory points, like Contested Outpost. That's why it's usually my yellow card, because I just sit on top of it and you have to come to me regardless. And I sit there and I gain points every single turn. And if you choose not to engage, then I win even bigger. And then you force them in, and then you have to like come up with like a strategy of, how do I kill one thing and get away? Or do I think if I alpha strike all of my stuff into you, I can kill you without losing more points? So if you look at the Starhawk in this scenario is roughly 200 points because of all the upgrades that are on it. So you have both of the MC-30s that are worth roughly 90 to 100 points. And then you have the Starhawk, which is the rest of the fleet, which is like 200 points. Can I guarantee kill one of the MC-30s or both the MC-30s and survive? Or lose less than that roughly 200 points. So if I had an ISD, I could trade the ISD for both of the MC-30s, which is 150 points versus nearly 200, and I could win that way. Or I could just full out assault into the Starhawk and kill it. If I do that, I need to make sure that I have less than, again, 200 points to lose to do it. So like you just kind of like have to calculate back and forth, what parts of his fleet can I pick apart easily, or do I just have to like full on head slam into it And do I have enough damage to out-damage their tankiness? That's kind of how you have to think about it. So hopefully that helps. I know it's like, just play the game, but like part of it's like you have to just figure out, it's a puzzle. So I see the game as a couple different sets of puzzles. So you have fleet building, which is a puzzle. And then you have objectives. Objective picking for both sides is kind of its own puzzle, which is kind of attached to fleet building. Deployment for me is based on the objective, based on fleets. I don't try to like do anything surprising with deployment, like, oh, I didn't expect that. No, for the most part, like, there's a game plan. As soon as the ships hit the table, there's a game plan, and that's based off your fleet and my fleet, and what I think I can kill on your fleet, and where I think what things are on your fleet are located. Which is why I like contested outposts and why I like Solar Corona, because I know where everything is of yours, or where it should be on my side of the table versus your side of the table. Because if I put down in one corner the contested outpost and you put your fleet, it's hard to do on a camera, way over here, well, you have to then come across the whole table to get to me, which just gives me points. Like, logically, you should be like right above me. Boom, we just joust. Because if you're putting yourself over here, you're doing something weird. We're playing contested outposts, you should be right here. So that's kind of how I think about it. Like, you think about it, how do I control where they deploy versus where I deploy? And then how can I then move? The game's only 6 turns. If you really wanted to, you could practice and be like, if I'm playing contested outpost and I'm starting my ship here on this part of the table, where would this ship be at turn 6? Sometimes it's just good to sit down and run through that and know where your ship can be. Or if they choose contested outposts and my ship only moves speed 2, if I started up here, where will I end? Sometimes bumping into your own ship is really advantageous because that stops where your theoretical endpoint will be, or adjust where it is. And being able to do that and know that in 6 turns this is where your ship is going to be is huge. So like with the MC-30, like if you saw how I moved, like how there was no combat, tons of combat done, that was intentional in this game. I knew where I was moving my ships from the very beginning. And like when Ken slowed my MC-30s down, I was fine with it. I was fine with that because I knew I could lose both MC-30s and still table Ken. And if he slowed me down to keep me in range to shoot, that's just more shooting I got to do with the MC-30s. My intent was to always go from outside of range into range and then just ram them and stay them where they were. The Starhawk was going to turn into them, and to get past them, it had to kill them. So that's kind of how I think about a lot of that. Like, this ship will end up here. Change speed up and down, eventually it will get here. But do I think the opponent will be there? No. So really the last turn that I have to worry about the ship staying alive is down here. If it survives that, then it'll just end there naturally. So, like, if you look at planning ahead in your fleet, like, you know it's only 6 turns. You know where your fleets are going to be. Then it becomes dice probability of activation order. Do I kill you before you kill me? And most of the time it is. So like sometimes Ken and I will just talk through a game and then we'll replay it again and be like, well, if we were to set up this way, what would happen? And you can actually easily predict who should win a game as soon as ships hit the table, just by dice probability if they do what's the expected thing. It's an interesting like thought gymnastics. So you have the puzzle of building the fleets, puzzle of objectives and choosing, and then the puzzle of what you're doing in the game, and then the game starts. All those puzzles have already been done. And then it's just dice probability, and if you make less mistakes than the opponent. Yeah, the COVID concerns are real. Yeah, like, so I work as a respiratory therapist, so I see a lot of it, and this new variant acts way differently contagious-wise. Like, it's as contagious as measles, which is super contagious, and right now, the positive thing is the vaccine works for lowering the chance of death from it, which is what its intent is, so definitely do that. But it doesn't necessarily lower your chances anymore to 0 of getting COVID again. So I've seen patients that had COVID, got vaccinated, got boosted, and now have COVID again because of this variant's very much different. So I think that people from around technically the world, if they could get into the world, all coming to Adepticon, even if they're all vaccinated and they're all wearing masks, like masks don't protect you 100%. 3 feet apart at a table for like Armada tournaments are like 12 plus hours. That's a long time to be with strangers in close proximity in a closed building with hundreds of people there. I just don't know if it's worth the risk. And for me, the answer is it isn't with a newborn on the way. Some other people might be, but personally, that's just my personal opinion. So I usually try not to go down like concerns, but it is a concern. Like, I don't know if you guys knew this. Like, they always talk about at major gaming conventions, major bugs that get spread. So it was always just like kind of a joke. There was like this, what is it, Gen Con flu or something like that. It's like anytime you have large groups of people together, things spread. And a lot of times it's like that. And that's any time that you get large groups of people together, you have risks of that happening. Especially when you're in like close, large group of people together. Like, thankfully, like gamers are starting to come around a little bit, but you have like that gamer, like usually it's associated more with 40K. But like, oh, they're a gamer, they don't wear deodorant, they don't shower. Well, some people are gross and they go to these things and they're like, oh, I got to maximize my time for the 3-4 days that I'm here, and I'm not going to shower, I'm not going to brush my teeth, and I'm not going to, do any hygiene. Well, that doesn't help the fact that viruses and bugs and bacteria and things like that spread. That's always been the case with conventions, and now with like actual like super contagious things, like that's another layer to think about. So it's crazy. Okay, so I think I'm gonna call it there. I'll leave you guys with a sneak peek of this coming week, just commanders. So Ken is going to be flying General Kraken, and those of you that know, Ken flew this for one of the online tournaments that he did, so this is like his final iteration of it. And then I'm going to be playing an Obi-Wan fleet that I straight up stole from one of my friends, made a little bit of adjustments with it. So it's an interesting, weird match. And actually, this whole season's had a lot of weird matches. So you should watch this one to like the very end, because everything in this match matters. We have like multiple battle zones. It's a pretty good match. So you have that to look forward to. So big shout out again to our Patreon members. This fleet that I flew this week, the Agate Fleet, was brought to us by McSweaty. And he submitted it and we selected it and we flew it, and it was a lot of fun. I like the fleet. So until next time, thank you very much. I'm John. This is Ion Radio, and you've been watching the Backseat Admiral.